Hey, what are functions? Functions are reusable code which does something when you call it. And reusable code means that you can call this function as often as you want. So you only need to create it once, and then you can use it as often as you want. So let's create an example. And here you can already see a function has two parts. The first part is the creation of a function, also called declaration, which creates no output. And then the second part is the running of a function, also called calling. And this calling of a function creates an output. To create a function, we write a function, then we write the name of a function. Let's say our function is called myAwesomeFunction. Then we add parentheses and curly brackets. And now inside these curly brackets, we can put the content of our function. So in our case, we write console.log and we write hey and close this with a semicolon. And you can see that inside our function, the content gets closed with a semicolon, but we do not close the whole function with a semicolon. And now we already created our function. That's all we have to do. And for calling our function, we just have to write the name of our function, the parentheses, and a semicolon. And now when JavaScript reaches line 16, it sees the name and the parentheses, and it runs this code on line 16. So let's open our browser, and we can open the console. And now if we refresh our web page, if we save our editor and we refresh our web page, you can now see here we get hey. Like I said in the beginning, we can call the function multiple times. So let's say we copy them and we go back to our website and we refresh it. You can see now we got multiple heys. Okay, now let's first clean that up. And the next thing we are going to do is adding parameters to our function. A parameter is pretty much just a variable which will be set at our function call and which then get used inside of our function. So let's create it to make it more understandable. We create this parameter. Also, you can think of it as a variable. And like any other variable, we can call it pretty much whatever we want. In our case, we will just call it name. And now we can use it inside of our function. And now if we go to our function calling, we can set this variable name to whatever we want. So let's say we write John, and now when we call our function, name gets set to John, and here we have console.log hey plus John. And if we refresh our web page, we can see hey John. You can also see that here between hey and John we are missing some space, and we can easily fix that by just adding a bit of space. And here now we got hey John with space. Now let's create a second function calling, and let's say we set name to Shane. And now when JavaScript reaches line 13, it sets name to Shane and it console.logs hey space plus Shane. And here we can see hey John and hey Shane. And you can also see that we put John and Shane into quotation marks, because if we wouldn't do that, JavaScript would think that John is a variable. And now if we would refresh our web page, you see that John is not defined because we don't have any variable of John. Of course, we could also create a variable of John and set it to whatever we want, and then that value of that variable would be put here, but we just put a string into it. Now we will do pretty much exactly the same once more. We will add a second parameter to it, and we call it last name, and we console.log hey space plus name plus even more space plus last name. And now this last name must also be set at our function call. So we got John, and last name is set to Smith, and Jane, her last name is also set to Smith. They are Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And now if we refresh our web page, we see hey John Smith and hey Jane Smith. Now let's do the same thing once again. So we add age to our function. So we write even more space plus age. And now let's say John Smith is 69 years old and Jane Smith is 96 years old. And we can refresh our web page and we see hey John Smith 69 and hey Jane Smith 69. You can also see that we did not put quotation marks around 69 and 96 because in JavaScript variables can never start with a number. So when JavaScript sees the 6, it already knows, hey, this cannot be a variable, so it takes this whole number as an integer. Of course we could use quotation marks, and now JavaScript sees this as a string, declares it as a string, and in our example here it doesn't make a difference, but depending on what you want to do with your function, it can make a big difference if your numbers are string or an integer. So be careful how you declare them. Let me explain this whole thing one more time so you absolutely understand it. First of all, ignore that stuff and let's look at this stuff. Here we can see that in our function creation we got the variables or parameters called name, last name and age, and these variables get set by the function call. So in the function call, that's the lower part, we see we got John, Smith and 69, and so we set name to John, we set last name to Smith and age to 69. If the order would be in another way, then the variables would be declared different. So the order is really important. And the next thing we will learn is math and functions. So it is really basic, so don't worry, you will understand this. First of all, here we create a function called myMathFunction, and here we have the calling of a function. Now let's create two parameters for our function, and we will call it number1 and number2. And remember, you can call them however you want. So you could also call them the bees and the birds, but because we are professional, we'll keep it at number1 and number2. And the next thing is we create a variable, and that variable will be called result, and we set that to number1 plus number2, and then we write console.log result semicolon, and now we need to set number1 and number2. So let's say number1 is 7 and number2 is 5, and when we go to our website and we refresh it, we see 12 because it sets number1 to 7, number2 to 5, and variable result is 7 plus 5, which is 12, and then it takes this result, which is 12, and puts it into our console. Of course, we can also write minus. So we got 7 minus 5, which is 2. Here we see 2. We can divide them. We got 1.4, and we can also multiply them to get 35. Here, 35. Great, now you know the basics of math and functions. The next thing we will learn is the return value. So we always used console.log to see our output, which is fine and which is good and which works, but we have a problem that right now we cannot use the result of our function in our remaining code. So we need to find a way to get this result and use it in the remaining code of our code. So let's say we have this if statement, and we want to say that if the result of our math function is bigger than 20, then say it is bigger than 20, else it should say it is smaller than 20. And now you will probably say, hey, make it easy, just run this function, then create this result, and this result will be put into the if statement, and now it should work, but it doesn't, because inside of our functions we always have a local scope. That means that variables that get created inside a function cannot be used outside of that function. More on that later. For now, just trust me, this results variable will not work. What will work is the return value. So first of all, let's delete this console.log and also delete our variable result, and we will write return, and that's about it. Now JavaScript will reach line 7, it will read return, then it multiplies these two numbers, and it will take the result and returns it to the place where we called this function. So in this case it will read if 35, because 7 multiplied by 5 is 35, if 35 is bigger than 20, then console.log it is bigger than 20. And if we refresh our web page, you can see this is exactly what we get. One thing about the return value is also that it's always the end of the function. So if we would, for example, write number 1 equals number 1 minus 20, then you can already see VS Code makes this kind of grayish, and we can see remove unreachable code. This code is unreachable because, like I said, when it reaches line 7, it will return the 35, and after it returns it, the rest of the function will be ignored. So if we want to modify our numbers, we need to do this before we reach return statement. And if we refresh, we should actually get it is smaller than 20. And here we see it is smaller than 20. And last thing we will learn about is the scope of variables. So here we have a function called myScopeExample function with the parameter first name that is set to John. Then we created a variable called greetings, which is set to hello space, and we got a console.log greetings plus first name, so it puts hello John into our console. Inside our functions, variables have a local scope. That means that variables that are created inside a function can be only used inside of that function. So that means that if we try to use greetings, the variable greetings, outside of our function, we will get an error code or an undefined. So let us try it. We console.log greetings, we refresh our web page, and you see greetings is not defined. So if you create variables inside your function, you can only use them inside of that function. On the other hand, variables that are created outside of a function can be used inside of a function as long as they are created before the creation of the function. So let's say we delete this, and let's say we create our variable greetings before we create our variable, and we save this, and now we see that it actually works. But it only works if we create the variable before we create our function. So if we copy and paste it below here, it will not work. Here you see undefined shown, because the variable greetings isn't set yet. So this is all for this video, and yes, bye.